There's a silent test almost every dismissive avoidant runs on you after you go quiet, and most men fail it without even knowing it existed. She's not going to ask if you moved on. She's going to watch. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what she's looking for and how to make sure you pass it without even trying. No announcement comes before this test starts. No conversation, no warning, no moment where she tells you she is watching for anything at all. It simply begins the day your behavior gives her the first real reason to wonder, and from that point forward, everything you do becomes data. She is quietly collecting, whether she admits that to herself or not. I spent years failing this test without realizing a test existed, convinced that staying visible, staying reachable, staying just present enough that she would never forget me was somehow the smart move. It was the opposite. Every signal I thought was proving my worth was actually proving the one thing that fails this test instantly, that I had not moved on at all, no matter how convincingly I pretended otherwise. Detachment, for an avoidant woman, is not measured by what you say. She has heard plenty of men say they are fine, that they have let go, that they wish her well, while every subsequent action contradicted the claim within days. Words are cheap in this evaluation. What she is actually measuring is something closer to consistency over time, a pattern she watches build or collapse across weeks, not a sentence you delivered once and then fail to live up to. The first thing she checks is response latency, though she would never describe it in those terms. Not whether you respond, but how quickly, and more importantly, whether that speed changes depending on how much time has passed since you last spoke. A man who has genuinely detached does not reply within 90 seconds to a message that arrived after 3 weeks of silence. He replies on his own schedule, the one dictated by his actual life, not by the sudden spike of relief that her name reappeared on a screen. If your reply time speeds up the moment she resurfaces after distance, that alone tells her more than anything you could have written in the message itself. The second thing under evaluation is what your life looks like from the outside during the silence. This is not really about social media, although that is often where the evidence collects most visibly. It is about whether your world clearly kept moving without her in it. A birthday celebrated with other people, a trip taken, a goal pursued that has nothing to do with the relationship at all. She is not looking for proof that you are thriving in some performative, aggressive way designed to make her jealous, because performance reads as performance almost instantly. She is looking for quieter, harder to fake evidence that your days are simply full, on their own terms, independent of whatever happened between you. Picture how this test actually plays out over a real stretch of time. A man goes quiet after things end, genuinely quiet, no parting shots, no dramatic declaration of moving on, just an actual absence. 4 weeks pass. During those 4 weeks, without either of them speaking, she checks in on his life twice, both times through channels that require no interaction at all, glancing at something visible from a distance rather than reaching out directly. Both times, what she finds is unremarkable in the best possible way. Him living normally, nothing staged, nothing screaming for her attention, nothing that reads as an invitation disguised as indifference. By the 4th week, something in her assessment has quietly shifted, not toward missing him more, but toward a kind of respect that only builds when someone proves they meant what their silence implied. The third element she is watching closely, and the one most men get wrong without realizing it, is what happens the moment contact actually resumes, whenever that eventually occurs. A man who passed the earlier stages of the test can still fail here, in the first few exchanges after silence breaks. If those first messages arrive dense with meaning, references to the past, subtle attempts to reopen old emotional territory, questions designed to gauge whether she still feels anything, the entire earlier pattern gets reinterpreted retroactively. She realizes the calm was never real detachment, just discipline being held together long enough to wait for exactly this opening. Genuine detachment shows up light in these first exchanges, present but unremarkable, engaged without urgency, exactly the way someone talks to a person from their past who no longer occupies a central place in their present. This is where most men sabotage themselves without recognizing the mistake happening in real time. Some manage months of genuine silence, real growth, real distance, only to flood the first reconnection with everything they were holding back, unraveling weeks of authentic detachment in a single overeager conversation. Others take the opposite approach entirely, performing coldness deliberately once contact resumes, calculated distance meant to prove a point, which reads just as clearly as eagerness it was trying to disguise, because genuine indifference does not require effort to maintain, and effort is exactly what she is trained to notice. Here is the mechanism underneath why this test exists at all, and understanding it changes how you interpret everything else. An avoidant woman's deepest fear in reconnecting with anyone from her past is walking back into a dynamic where she becomes responsible for managing someone else's unresolved feelings again. She left, at least in part, to escape the pressure being needed in a way she cannot sustain. If reconnecting simply reopens that exact same pressure, nothing about the situation has actually changed, regardless of how much time passed in between. The test is not cruelty. It is her checking whether the specific thing she needed distance from is actually resolved, or whether it just went quiet for a while, and is waiting to resurface the moment she gets close again. There's a deeper layer worth understanding here, too, one that explains why some men pass this test without ever trying to. The men who pass most convincingly are rarely the ones executing a deliberate strategy at all. They are the ones who genuinely did the work during the silence, who used the distance to actually process what happened instead of simply waiting it out, and whose detachment by the time contact resumes is not a performance because there is nothing left underneath to perform over. Strategy can survive a few weeks. Genuine internal change survives years, and the difference between the two becomes unmistakable to anyone paying close enough attention over enough time. This raises a real question worth sitting with. Not, how do I pass her test? But, has enough actually changed in me that passing it would not require effort at all? Because a test designed to detect performance will eventually catch performance, no matter how well constructed, if the thing underneath it never actually shifted. The only version of this that holds up long-term is the one where detachment stopped being something you were demonstrating and became something that was simply true. It is worth naming plainly what this test does not measure, because misunderstanding this leads people toward strategies that backfire. It does not measure how much you loved her, and it is not a referendum on a relationship's worth. Plenty of men who genuinely love someone deeply still pass this test easily, precisely because loving someone and needing them to notice you move on are two entirely separate things. Conflating the two is where most of the sabotage happens, treating detachment like proof the relationship did not matter, when real detachment can exist right alongside real love that simply learned to stop requiring anything back. If you recognize yourself somewhere in the middle of this test right now, still uncertain whether your silence will hold up under her exact scrutiny, the honest move is not manufacturing evidence to pass an evaluation you cannot fully control the timing of. It is continuing to work regardless of whether she is watching at all, building a life substantial enough that her assessment, whenever it happens, simply confirms something that was already true rather than something you assembled specifically for her benefit. If you already know, without needing to guess, that the version of you existing right now genuinely does not need her attention to feel complete, there is nothing left to prepare for. That certainty is a test already passed, whether she ever runs it or not, because a test built to detect performance stops mattering entirely once there is no performance left to detect. Because the goal was never to convince her you moved on. The goal was to actually move on thoroughly enough that whenever she watches for it, find exactly what it is looking for without you having to try.